All right, friends, let's talk about the release and reception of The Harder They Fall, which, God damn
Harder
it.
They Come.
It is. No, there's a Humphrey Bogart movie called The Harder They Fall, which someone, like, literally today, like, someone wrote an essay for it for Crooked Marquee that I was, like, editing that piece today. And I was just like, I can't fuck these up when I'm doing the show tonight.
Get this wrong.
Here we go. When Heat Minute Productions presents Guide for the Film Fanatic, the podcast where we invite a guest to pick one movie from Danny Perry's seminal 1986 film reference book and talk to us about that movie. I'm your host, Jason Bailey, and across the mic and across the country from me is my co-host,
Michael Hull.
And our guest today, friends, is a terrific film critic, author, and film programmer who is currently doing God's work as the curatorial director at the Criterion Collection following his remarkable run as director of film programming at the Brooklyn Academy of Music. His writing has appeared in Film Comment, Reverse Shot, Vulture, The Guardian, and Sight and Sound, among others. And he just followed up his razor-sharp book, Facing Blackness, Media and Minstrelsy in Spike Lee's Bamboozled, with the expansive and excellent The World of Black Film, a journey through cinematic blackness in 100 films. Say hello to our friend, Ashley Clark. Hi, Ashley.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Thank you so much for coming on. It's such a thrill to get to connect, to talk. Ashley and I go way back. His Bamboozled book and my Richard Pryor book came out around the same time from the same ultimately shady publisher.
Yeah, we did a talk at Videology in Brooklyn.
We did.
R.I.P., you know.
Yeah.
One for the grandkids. It was really fun, actually,
Yeah.
talking about those films and Richard Pryor's career in concert with Bamboozled. It was a good time.
It really was, yeah. It was that could have been a really great imprint if well, anyway. Let's start with the new book. Let's talk about the current book. This is a gigantic. First of all, the book is terrific. If I didn't make that clear from the intro, I want to make sure everybody know. Firm seal of approval from Guy from the Film Fanatic on this.
Absolutely.
It's a gigantic subject, black film. Tell us about, first of all, for people who haven't read it, the approach that you use in the book to take it on, and then I'm also curious to know how you landed on that particular approach.
Yeah, so the approach is 100 films in chronological order. And I've restricted myself to one film per director.
Okay.
You know, I had to put some restrictions on what I was going to write about. So there were some tricky decisions and difficult decisions. Which Melvin Van Peebles film? Which Spike Lee film? You know, it was always going to run the risk of being contentious. As hinted at by the title of the book, it's a deliberately very international choice.
Right.
And in many respects, the book is constructed as a response to something that I've noticed, which is an occasional, or perhaps more than occasional, conflation of black film with American film.
Right.
And I think that there's many, many very good reasons for that. It's not something I'm especially hostile to. But the pitch, you know, I was fortunate to be contacted by a publishing house about the book because the commissioning editor had recently, she'd seen the Slate and NPR collaboration, which was the new black film canon, published a few years ago, which was
terrific. Yeah,
you know, the 75 greatest films by black directors, and I contributed to that list, and I was very proud to, and it was a great list. But it did repeat that same trope of, you know, 90% pretty much black American films with a couple of better known African films and, you know, one or two others thrown in. There are, again, so many good reasons for that. I work at Criterion. Sure. Criterion has had a lot to do, and the Martin Scorsese's World Cinema Project and the Film Foundation with making films like Black Girl and Tuki Buki available. People can only write and think and talk about what they know about, what they've seen. So I've approached the project with a spirit of generosity and hopefully to open up a world of black film for people that may not be so familiar with it, and that is also reflected in my choices. So to answer my earlier, potentially but not actually rhetorical question, which Melvin Van Peebles film did I pick? I picked The Story of a 3-Day Pass because that's a film that he made in France.
Right.
And it was an adaptation of a book that he'd written in French.
Right.
Because he was in France because they wouldn't give him any work in America.
Yeah.
And you see that story crop up over and over again, whether it's Josephine Baker or Paul Robeson or James Baldwin, who've left the racist climate of America to come to Europe and to try things out there with, in theory, greater opportunities. And the book was an opportunity, again, to look at fascinating international co-productions between USA and Nigeria and Brazil, and just try and thread it all together in a way that felt personal and opinionated and occasionally, again, slightly contentious. But it was very important for me to be the guiding hand and to be the author of it and to take you through it as a story. Those are some of the whether it's film music film writing or music writing, some of the stuff that I've best responded to is having that sense of being taken through a story arc and have it feel personal, because there is a world where this book is. I've written an introduction, and there's a bunch of separate essays by different writers covering specialist areas, which could be great. But the thing I wanted to do was a bit more personal and have more of a through line to it. So, in a rather large nutshell, that's kind of what the book's about and what I'm trying to do with it.
Even within those, I think extremely sensible parameters that you mentioned, trying to, only one film from any specific director, et cetera, it still must have been incredibly daunting to chip away at what I imagine started as a very large list to get down to 100. What was that process like?
I was looking at it was on a film by film, case by case basis. What am I trying to do with this entry? So there are films that I've chosen almost as avatars. So that the hardest thing really was almost going within spheres and within genres, because I knew that what was I going to pick for the LA Rebellion, for example, which for listeners and viewers is a historical independent film movement, and it came out of student filmmaking at UCLA in the late 60s, 70s and 80s, and has spawned some incredible films and filmmakers. And I think the most, to us cinephiles, the most famous is Killer of Sheep by Charles Burnett. So you might think that that's the most obvious one. But I kind of wanted to write about To Sleep with Anger because that gave me an opportunity to write about Danny Glover. Sure. And it gave me an opportunity to shout out the amazing work that Danny Glover has done with his production company. Right. So I was constantly thinking about what I wanted to cover and what films would be the conduit for that. So in the capsule about A Different Image, which is the film I chose to represent the LA Rebellion, I deliberately chose a slightly lesser known film because it was in dialogue with the very previous film, Burning an Illusion by Menelik Shabazz, which is a black British film from the early 80s. So it was a real delicate dance, and there was a lot of kind of association happening. Some of those were pre-planned, some came as I was writing it, which, as a writer is a really joyous thing when these connections are springing up and your synapses are firing. And again, with which race movie am I going to pick? Which Oscar Michaud, etc. And I wrote about Within Our Gates from 1920.
Sure.
And the challenge was to, in the space of 450 words, give you some textual analysis, which is a very complicated film. Not only what it's about, but how is Oscar Michaud doing it? Yeah. What are race movies? What was the social and historical climate at the time? So it was really on a film by film level, figuring out what the hell it was I was trying to say within those bounds. And that's a tough. I don't want to give myself PTSD here, or maybe I already have it. I don't know. Can you give yourself it?
Sure.
But it's a tough word count. That 450 zone, because it's bigger than a little capsule.
Yep.
But it's less than when you can really get going. There's no room to do the throat clearing. As you can tell, I love doing the throat clearing, but I couldn't do any of that within this kind of format. So the list never got that long. I think there were some films that were painful to omit because even though I loved them, I'd already sort of covered that territory.
That makes sense.
And there's a lot of American films that I love, but I had to be true to my own thesis. Yeah. And I didn't want to over-represent American films in there. even though at the end of the day, there's probably about 40% of the films are
Sure.
American, which is not nothing.
Sure. One of the things that really does come into play for me when I'm pitching books and deciding what I want to work on next is saying to myself, okay, what that I haven't seen will writing this give me an excuse to finally watch? Were these all of these movies that you had seen, or did you have an opportunity in writing it to fill some blind spots, or to maybe to return even to some things that you hadn't seen in a very long time?
Yeah, there were a few films that were completely new to me in my research process. There was a film from Niger called Kabascabo, about a kind of soldier returning from the French campaign in Indochina back to his hometown in Niger. Which was a film that I just hadn't encountered it, and in my research I found it. I was able to find out the European sales agent and get a link for it. You know, that question again of access and how do we even see these films? You know, was a very important one for me during this process. So that was one. There was a film that I'd never heard of, and the way I made my way to it, I was in conversation with a gallerist about using a particular image for a title that I was going to use, and the gallerist said to me, "I'm afraid we don't have a poster for that film, but I've just, out of the goodness of my heart, prepared a small selection of films that we do have in posters for that are Black and African related." And it was a film called Amok from 1983, which is a South African film that I'd never heard of. It's not widely available. In the end, I found a almost unwatchable version of it on YouTube, like sub VHS level rip with Italian dubbing.
Oh my god!
You know, and it was I think it was January. It was freezing cold, and I had to maintain my discipline because I have a demanding full-time job and a family. And I remember sitting in a cafe up the road, and someone kept leaving the window open, and it was 10 o'clock in the morning, and I was watching a film on sub VHS quality about apartheid, and I just thought, am I, can I really be doing this with my life?
Right.
But it was so rewarding, and the reason I chose it, really, it was image-led, because this book is a beautiful kind of coffee table book. The design of Violetta was just amazing in her thinking of how the book would come together. And the poster that the gallerist shared with me, which is the important part, was one of those crazy Polish posters.
Oh, love that.
And it's this amazing picture of the lead character's head, like in a vice being crushed. And it's really visceral, but it has that surreal quality that those Polish posters have. Wow. And I was thinking to myself, this would look amazing and arresting in the book. And again, on that theme of connections, it so turns out that the lead character in this film is played by an actor called Robert Lientzol, who's a French West Indian actor, who's also in West Indies by Med Hondo, which is an important film in the book. He's in The Old Sorceress and the Valet, which is another French film from later on. And he keeps cropping up in the book. And you see these amazing figures that were connected to all these other filmmakers. And it becomes this treasure hunt of looking in the credits and seeing these faces pop up. So again, it was a journey of discovery and constant connection in the writing and researching of it, which hopefully translates into something kind of enjoyable for the reader as well.
I'm so glad you're here, because just like if you've never seen any cult movies, you know what I mean, and you sort of open one of Perry's books or you open Guide for the Film Fanatic and you think that you've sort of delved a little bit deep, like if you've seen like Sweetback and Coffee, like that's great, but like you're not done, you know, and this is an opportunity, I think, for people to really sort of like actually dive into this conversation the same way that Perry offers with his books. That's just not a thing. There's not a lot of places for that, and especially not around black film, especially not around international black film. I mean, Amok obviously is maybe the most dramatic example, but you named 10 movies in that list that I imagine most even of our audience probably hasn't seen.
Yeah, and that's exactly it. It's all done in that spirit of generosity rather than, oh, you haven't seen this?
Right.
You know, exactly. And sometimes cinephile culture can be a little bit like that.
Very much like that.
And there is the key thing, as I mentioned, access. You know, I had another decision to make, which was, am I going to include films that aren't that widely available? Mm-hmm. And broadly speaking, I've kept it mostly to films that you can just about find.
Okay.
But there are a few that you can't. And my hope is that if people pick up this book and the right people see it, actually, one thing, it happened during the process of the book. There's a film from Guinea-Bissau called Motu Nega, which is a kind of a very dramatic and moving anti-colonial docudrama from the 80s. And it kind of is not available. And I thought this film is so important because it's a Lusophone African film, by which I mean it's Portuguese language. So it's derived from the Portuguese colonists. A lot of the African cinema that we know is Francophone. So Senegalese film, it's French speaking. And there wasn't much Lusophone African film. So I thought, even though this film isn't widely available, I'm going to put it in anyway. Lo and behold, a few months later, it's announced in the New York Film Festival revivals lineup.
Wow.
So that, to me, was an endorsement of my approach, not to be too restrictive about things that we can see, because how do we know in months or years to come what is out there? So exactly. I didn't want to date the book if I didn't have to.
Exactly. Yeah. You got to write a streaming guide based on what you can get right now, but that book's going to be around forever.
Yeah.
Well, congratulations on it. It's a tremendous achievement and
Thank you.
Really wonderful work. Okay, so to the matter at hand, what film did you select to discuss with us today?
I picked The Harder They Come by Perry Henzell, a Jamaican film from 1972.
Jamaica's first feature is America's #1
Best soundtrack all time.
Wow. He's just going to throw that on the table to begin with.
Right out the bat. Best soundtrack. If for me, if I only get to listen to one soundtrack for the rest of my life, right? I mean,
That's fair.
Score, it's Pelham. Soundtrack? No.
There you go. So this is a very American sale of the movie from New World. I love that the pull quotes, they start with the one from Cream, and then the New York Times quote is the second one. That tells you the audience that they were going for when they were marketing The Harder They Come.
And obviously this comes out a bit later as well, doesn't it, in the US?
Yes, yeah. But this is very much a New World Corman trailer. This is a sizzle trailer. It's music, it's guns, it's fast. They're selling it to an American cult audience. They say cult right at the beginning, which we'll get into. Silver Lion Award Venice Film Festival. Got to mention that at the end in small type. So The Harder They Come.
That font is hard as hell.
It's a good font.
Sorry.
It's a real good font. Okay, so as Ashley mentioned, The Harder They Come was directed and co-written by Perry Henzell, a white Jamaican filmmaker who based his script on the legendary Jamaican outlaw and folk hero Vincent Ivanhoe Martin, known as, Ryging. I knew I was going to screw it up. Ryging. It stars Jimmy Cliff, then a rising reggae artist with little acting experience. The real Ivanhoe Martin had not been a musician, so that element was worked into the screenplay when Cliff was cast. It was a wise move, as the reggae soundtrack became one of the film's biggest selling points, and its success introduced the Jamaican music to worldwide audiences, but especially American audiences. The picture was released in Jamaica in the summer of 1972, where it broke box office records, but when Roger Corman's New World Pictures picked it up and released it in America in February 1973, it didn't make much noise. It was only after it was marketed to the then burgeoning midnight movie and cult movie circuit that it found its audience here. All right, Mike, what does Danny Perry say about The Harder They Come in Guide for the Film Fanatic?
He says a lot.
Yeah.
For him. This hard-hitting, crudely made, angry, left-wing polemic with a spectacular reggae soundtrack has developed a strong cult in America among political moviegoers. Jamaican reggae superstar Jimmy Cliff plays Ivan Martin, a young man from the country who comes to Kingston to make it as a recording star. When the record he makes gets no promotion, he finds work in the island's ganja trade. The corrupt police allow it to continue so the poor will have work and not rebel, and so the hierarchy that forms within the black criminal element will keep blacks divided. When Juan refuses to pay a middleman some of his earnings, he is set up for arrest. Juan kills the cop and goes underground. While he's on the lam, his record becomes a smash hit, and he becomes a folk hero, like the legendary 50s political outlaw. I know you said Reagan, but wasn't there another? You had a G on the end of yours. He does not have a G on the end.
What does it say there?
It's spelled Rhygin. Is it meant to have a G or no?
I think so, but
he also accidentally calls him Juan. So go with what Ashley
I was
is
wondering
suggesting.
there.
Yeah.
He's referring to Jimmy Cliff's character as Juan.
Right, and his name is Ivan.
I was reading that like in the moment, and I was like, "Who the fuck is he talking about?" But I just kept going with it. We're gonna start this over.
The harder they Juan.
All right. I caught a couple of them, but I missed a couple. So okay, there you go. I think you're good now.
While he's on the lam, his record becomes a smash hit, and he becomes a folk hero, like the legendary 50s political outlaw Reggae. When the New World Pictures released this film in America, they figured black viewers would like Ivan. The slightly built, gangly, cocky Cliff is too sexual for most whites to be comfortable with. As Ivan, he wears loud clothes, slurs his words, speaks patois, the Rastafarian dialect, answers back, has a violent streak, carries a gun, and means to do something about being exploited by authorities and being told by Christian leaders to wait until he gets to heaven for happiness. That's the longest sentence I've ever read in my life. Okay. But I don't believe apolitical blacks wish to identify with Ivan. I would guess they resented the fact that when Ivan emulates their heroes, the American black super stud stereotypes, white director Perry Henzell is mocking the foolish, culturally corrupted, apolitical side of Ivan that contributes to his downfall. The Jamaica that Henzell shows us is not the Caribbean paradise of airplane commercials. The countryside is barren and infertile, and Kingston, the tourist center, is overcrowded, violent, seamy, and poverty-stricken. The villains in Jamaica are the pacifying church, although not the gospel music, the exploitive record business, the ganja business, the police, and the government. The one positive influence is the moral voice of the poor black community, the Rastafarians. They are the ones who have politicized the reggae music that all the poor listen to. The lyrics of Cliff's own songs reflect their philosophy. He sings of universal love, peace, the worth of the individual, and an end to exploitation, neocolonialism, imperialism, and authoritarianism, of the necessity for people to demand what they're entitled to, and of the desire to die rather than be a puppet or a slave. See the movie, buy the album, also with Janet Bartley, Roz Daniel Hartman, Basil Keane, Bobby Charlton, and Winston Stoney.
All right, so let's get right into it.
That Ashley, is long, and I don't know if I agree with all of it.
You don't have to. Ashley, what's your history with this one? When did you first see this one? What were your sort of initial impressions? Why did it stick with you to want to talk about today?
Well, yeah, I mean, I probably first saw it in my teens. I think, I have a personal connection to it in that my dad is a reggae musician.
Oh, wow.
And that my grandparents were from Jamaica.
Oh shit! Okay.
So they met in St Andrew, which is very close to Kingston. So, and I never really got to speak with my grandma and granddad on my dad's side about life in Jamaica, right? Mm-hmm. So, because they're no longer with us. My granddad died in 1994.
Okay.
So I was way too young then to be having any sorts of conversations about, history. I was interested in WWF at the time. And then my grandma, she had quite a long period of ill health and wasn't, sometimes older folk, or any of us might not be forthcoming about history, etc. So the primary function of Harder They Come for me, and the thing I enjoy most about it, is as a document of the country, of the place in a certain time. They would have left it long by then. My grandma and granddad came over to England in the 1950s as part of what is known as the Windrush generation, which was a large wave of Caribbean people that were kind of at the invitation of the British government to help rebuild the post-war economy, and found, hostility, not great employment, a difficult environment in many cases, but that didn't stop, my ancestors and people of my heritage building communities and building really amazing lives, including my grandparents. So that's the primary function of it for me. And I remember being very just moved to see the landscape and to hear the music, to know what it meant to my dad, to have that musical lineage and heritage represented up there on screen, and to know, as Danny mentions, as you're reading it out, and as we've all alluded to, it's the film, it's the cultural moment that, in close parallel with the rise of Bob Marley, sent reggae into the stratosphere. You know, it was a relatively recent musical genre at that time. It came from a lineage of different music in Jamaica, from like mento music, folk music, ska music, rocksteady. Then you get reggae and it all comes together. And this is the film. You know, Jamaica is such a small island and it's produced so much amazing culture. And for this film to be a part of that. I first saw it, I think, long before I was involved in the film industry or had maybe developed any sort of critical acuity. So I was just responding to it on that level.
Yeah.
So those are sort of that's how it resonated with me to begin with.
Now, you know, as we heard in the trailer, and this was a line that also was in a lot of the initial reviews that I read when prepping for the show. It really was promoted with this idea of like, this is the first, you know, Jamaican film, the first Jamaican feature, the big, the first import that we've seen from this country. You are very well versed in world cinema. How accurate is that assessment?
I mean, I'm generally allergic to firsts. The idea of declaring something the first.
Exactly.
Frankly, through bitter experience of having been proved wrong, from confidently saying something's the first, only for a year later, some archivist to turn up something earlier. So I think we can safely say it's one of the first major, cinematic cultural exports from Jamaica. It's not a place that's ever, been able for various social and political and industrial reasons to develop its own thriving film industry, not from the want of trying.
Right.
So, you're then looking at films like Rockers as well, which is a bit later, which is an amazing film.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're also looking at the Jamaican diaspora making work in other countries.
Right.
But there's a real rich tradition of literature and theatre, and Trevor D. Roan, obviously, who's the co-writer of the film, is just an amazing playwright and writer and social critic, social commentator. But yeah, I think we can safely say it's one of the first major cinematic milestones in Jamaica.
That makes sense. Mike, what's your history? When did you first start watching this one?
This whole season should just be called "Did You Smoke Weed with Mike in a Basement in the '90s?" Like, I mean, every movie. The first time I saw this movie, I was a fucking reefer head kid, and I had no idea what it was. And it was like, it was the music that you were excited about. But at that point, like, I hadn't really sort of figured out that sometimes you want movies that you can smell. That sometimes there's really something really nice about a really tangible film of the sort that, like, when you're a teenager, you don't really watch. You're not, unless I wasn't personally I didn't have a family that was cluing me into the classics or whatever, right? So I'm seeing 90s movies. And so initially, like, it was really just sort of the soundtrack that happens. And then 10 years later, I'm working for Chris Blackwell, who is the guy that discovered Bob Marley and started Island Records, right? And then he sells Island Records in '89, and he starts a new company, and I end up working for this other company, right? And so I'm not like working with Chris Blackwell, but everybody who populated his sort of post-Island Records thing were all people that he knew from then. So at that point, you couldn't reach in one way or another without hitting somebody that knew Jimmy Cliff, who just passed like a year or two ago. Like, he's there, he's around, he wants people to know who he is. At that point, this guy made every kind of record over the course of his career. So then now I'm hearing personal stories about this time and these people and these places, and the movie takes on a completely different. And then the guy who got me into that job writes this whole book about how everything we think of as Rastafarian is from these, like, Sadhu Hindu priests from India that were brought by the British as slaves, and then they were like, fuck this, and they fucked off to the mountains and went and started their own culture, their own, right? So then this is where Jamaica gets curry and dreadlocks and reefer and all these different things. And so this culture is this combination of African and Indian, and the sort of Taino, whatever the sort of native situation there, has all been wiped out. So it really is sort of a ground-based culture and now, like, this movie's a completely different thing. Now this movie is like a document of 500 years of the triangle slave trade. Now it's, you know what I mean?
Right.
Anyway, it's just like, I've gone through so many levels with this movie, and now you see it and you think about representation and you think about, just all these different questions. Actually, you know what? I'm more on his side now than I was the fucking first time I saw the movie. That's another sort of evolution that's gone, is that, like, I judge his reaction to his situation less and less the older I get, and the more I see it persist, and the more versions of that story that I hear. This movie's like way deeper, just for my experience of it, I think, than it was even meant to be, because they're just making the movie of their, of their sort of universe, right? Anyway, how about you? I'm sure you've seen it before this week.
I had. It will not shock you to hear that Michael Carmody showed it to me first. So,
oh, God bless
there
him.
You have it.
Shout out to a guy who showed a lot of us a lot of things we needed to see at a time we needed to see them.
Yeah, kind of the collective older brother to our generation of Wichitans. I gotta say,
first person I ever knew who like had his house smelled like Nag Champa. All right, that lets you know who Michael Carmody is.
So let's kind of start with Jimmy Cliff then, since you mentioned him, because he did pass fairly recently, as you mentioned, because he was not an actor at that time, but he is so authentic, so charismatic, so empathetic. What sort of qualities do you think he brought to this, and what do they add to the mixture here?
There's a real sense of authenticity and verisimilitude with the film, because there's a lot of people in there from the local scene,
right?
Just kind of playing I never like to play themselves, because they're doing something in there, right?
Absolutely.
Playing versions of themselves or slightly heightened, and having him as someone who's had the experience of being he's done the graft. He's a hard touring, hard grafting musician. Obviously, as we spoke about earlier, he wasn't a singer in the script until Jimmy Cliff came on board.
Yeah.
So you get that obvious dimension of, his voice comes in so quickly on the soundtrack. Many Rivers to Cross comes on pretty quickly. Mm-hmm. It's like they don't save that up.
Right.
It's like it hits you between the eyes. So It gives you, in addition to all of his like amazing facial and physical and expressive qualities, you have the voice taking you into an extra dimension, which gives the film that dimension that goes beyond the script and beyond the realism. So he's the full package in that respect, and he just has that. He has a charm, as you said. When he first looks at the preacher's ward, doesn't have to do much.
Right.
There's no need for a musical cue.
Right.
It's a look. And he embodies that very well. He's got a cheekiness to him, and he's just a sexy guy, and he's funny, and he's got that energy to him, and it all just comes together really well. It's such an amazing performance, and there's an unguardedness to it as well. It's not actorly,
Right.
You can imagine hiring a professional actor and then really trying to, okay, I've got to do this, but it just feels like it's obviously a technically skillful performance, but it does feel like it comes from a place of someone who's comfortable with expressing different emotions in different art forms. And bringing that into the acting space in I think a really interesting way, and he's definitely one of my favorite things about the film.
Yeah, absolutely. No, and it's so important that we are with him because of the sort of the darker turns that the character takes. How easily he sort of shifts from a purely sympathetic figure to a little bit of a sociopath, and yet you're still with him. When they're doing that sitting here in limbo sequence, which is also a nice little kind of Jamaica travelogue. Like you're happy for him, even though he's literally killed people by then.
Yeah.
Scumbags.
Yeah, well, that's true. That's very true.
They deserved it.
There you
Michael.
go. To the end of the music. There's a phenomenon in place in this movie, and really in any movie, where the plot in some degree centers on a hit record. This is the sort of that thing you do phenomenon, where if you're going to have a movie that's so much about a song being a hit and making someone a star, it has to be a really good fucking song. Like, first of all, just for narrative credibility, but also because the audience is going to hear this song like 12 times over the course of the movie. And I never got tired of the hit songs in this movie. They're so electric, you know, that necessity is just sort of fine. I was ready to hear it some more times.
It's a good point, and one that I hadn't like actively thought about, because you know the song's reputation precedes it. It's so in the culture, right? And I hadn't necessarily put the two and two together. That there's some pressure there.
Yeah,
you know, it can't be an all right, you know, ditty. It has to be the one, right?
Right.
And it certainly is. So it's a good point.
Yeah. And then, of course, you know, it's a great song, but then, you know, his off-stage exploits end up doing wonders for his radio play as well. And that was one thing that really struck me on this watch as I was sort of looking at it for thematic themes to discuss, as opposed to just like enjoying it as a visceral experience, which you can, is that the very subtle, maybe it's not even subtle, but the thematic idea of using crime to become famous was not something you see in a lot of other 70s movies. It became very big from like the 90s on, but there are almost shades of like Natural Born Killers in this movie, with the line where he says, "You not believe me? Didn't I tell you I was going to be famous one day?"
Yeah.
Talk to me a little bit about that, about this sort of idea of the life of crime as a media contraption.
Well, I think it's, in the case of this film, it's very plugged into the local hero of reggae, who, by the way, I should clarify, I think he died in 1948, so I don't think he was active in the 50s, unless Danny knows something we didn't.
I don't know. He didn't do a good job fact checking or like working his English. He needed somebody, an editor, to look over this one.
But it was, you know, his heart was in the right place on it. But I think, you know, so that is the source text here of, you know, somebody who did become famous and gripped the public through their criminal activities, and, you know, you got the people to root for them. But in the case of this text, you know, it bolts on the musical aspect to it, and the music is so compelling, and it asks these very basic questions. You know, I think all of us grapple with them all the time. Separating the artist from the art, you know, we know certain people have done terrible things, but fucking hell, that's a good song. You know, am I really going to turn it off? You know, so on a very basic human level, that's at play here as well. But I think you're right; it is prescient in that respect of having a sort of a nice ironic critique, a meta critique of what it means to become famous and to become successful, and how your perception as an outlaw plays into that, the bad boy thing. And it does tie into a lot of things that Danny, I think, astutely spoke about the film's political commentary, and about how it's on the side of the people and it's not on the side of the business or the politicians. So you're subtly and sometimes more explicitly urged to be on the side of this guy, and it's a testament to Jimmy Cliff's performance that he's able to walk that line and tread that line and essentially keep you on side. Rooting for him, even though he's doing these increasingly ridiculous things.
Yeah,
but part of that, I mean, you think about like part of how that works is that it feels justified. Like, you want me to do something silly? Why do you think everybody's reaction to Luigi Mangione? If he would have shot somebody who like wasn't ruining so many lives in this country, it would have just been like, he's just another, like, you know, hot criminal, right? Twitter loves a hot criminal, or the internet loves a hot criminal.
But imagine if Luigi Mangione had a hit record as well.
Bro, come on. Like, that shit would still be, like, millions of people's ringtones. I mean, there's something about the sort of the justified nature of it, where we feel like, all right, I'm not going to go literally shoot this guy in the head, but, like, I can see sort of how it happened, right? I mean, it's we all, there's no good way to voice it, but everybody knows what it feels like.
It's true. I mean, it's something that I was thinking about also when writing the book is, and I can't see into Perry Henzell's head from 50 years ago, but the extent to which it maps onto the blaxploitation boom, and you know, which played into how it was marketed,
Absolutely.
you know, in the US, and that idea of after so long of black audiences being underserved with, you know, strong, charismatic, sexual, forthright characters. You know, you have John Shaft, you have Superfly, you have Coffee and Foxy Brown, you have all of these people, and then you have Ivanhoe Martin as well, who's very much part of this sort of stable in terms of what he's doing in the film. You know, the things that he's good at in the film are kind of the same things that a lot of these characters are good at as well.
Yeah.
But you know, I find personally that the more I've watched the film, the more I kind of tune out a little bit in the second half, and the older I get, the more I'm moved by the first half, when it just does feel much more like a documentary style dive into the recording studios, the streets, the landscapes,
the churches.
The churches, right? And when there's space, I love this. My favorite bit in the whole movie, I watched it again recently, was when Toots and the Maytals pop up and sing "Sweet and Dandy," and they just play the whole song.
Yeah.
Like the film just stops, and they say we're gonna let them. And you can see Jimmy Cliff in the background watching it. You know, it serves a narrative function because that's the moment when you realise he's got ambitions and he's thinking, maybe I can do this too. And then the song ends. Then the next scene begins, and they just play the song again.
Right.
You know, and when the film's at its most sort of loose and immersive, before the plot kicks into gear, is when I'm most with it. And I think that is the stuff that's least like the blaxploitation boom,
Right.
happening in the States.
And
But
that's
I
also the
just
stuff
think
that wasn't in the trailer.
well, they crammed it exactly.
Yeah.
So I just think it's interesting. I'm not sure I have a larger point, but I just think it was interesting as I was writing the book and finding out chronologically
Right.
how these things map onto each other and how they relate. And as I said, the poster that I've used in the book has this kind of ridiculous tagline, you know, and it's him holding a woman, and
Right.
it might as well be Superfly.
Exactly.
You know,
Well,
it really is that.
I'm so glad you brought up that conversation too between those characters and this one, because then you can take it even further back and note that, you know, a lot of those films, particularly the ones with the criminal protagonists, you know, your Superfly, your Black Caesar, things like that, are throwing back to a kind of Warner Brothers 30s, 40s, Jimmy Cagney, Edward G. Robinson gangster movie. And that DNA is so present in this movie as well. I think even more than in some of those films. You know, again, when we're getting into the sort of, you know, the great montage when he's taking all of his action photos, and, you know, the sort of the criminal partaking of his worst impulses, of all of, you know, indulging in the ways that, you know, a lot of us in our darker moments might want to indulge, you know, sort of that vicarious living that we do sometimes at a crime movie, at a gangster movie in particular.
Yeah, and it puts it in that cinematic lineage, which is really just exciting as a film fan.
Absolutely.
As well.
Yeah, up to and including, you know, they have to do even though it's the 70s, they almost have to do the kind of Hays Code Scarface ending, where it's like, we can enjoy our anti-hero up to a point, but then he has to meet his tragic end, you know, because crime doesn't pay, et cetera, et cetera.
It's very abrupt ending, isn't it? Like
I love an abrupt, like, that's it, over, we're done, we don't need a lot of, you know, we don't need to put a lot of frosting on this cake kind of ending, you know.
It made me think of, again, watching it again recently, it made me think of American Werewolf in London.
Yes.
Which is a weird kind of, again, genre film kind of comparison, but a film that just kind of punches you in the gut and then just ends.
Yes.
You don't get that anymore, do you?
You don't. It's certainly not enough. I think the last time we actually got it, I was in the movie theater with Mike at Grindhouse, and when Death Proof ended that way, my dude stood up and clapped because it ended not 1 second later than it had to.
Sometimes films just need to end.
They do.
And this is a really good example of that.
Yeah, and the other thing that I did want to note, and then we'll move on, the insertion of the audience from the opening, watching and cheering the ending of this movie, is genius. Every time I watch this movie, I forget that that's coming, and I'm like knocked out by it over again. Just a brilliant metatextual touch in a movie that has not delved in that realm at all, but so clever and so cool.
And shows you the mind behind it as well.
Yeah.
You know, Perry Henzell, like really super smart guy. Had his training at the BBC, worked a lot in advertising, so understood the power of images and editing, obviously. His daughter, Justine Henzell, who kind of assisted on the film, you know, has done a great job in stewarding the film's legacy. And she's spoken very very warmly about just how much he thought about what he was doing with the images. And, you know, so this is the kind of film that can often get thrown in to a certain generic style, but there is a lot of thought in it. And, you know, the follow-up film that Perry Henzell tried to make for many years was called No Place Like Home. And it was a sort of inversion of this, you know. So this one's the country boy going to the city, but the No Place Like Home is a New York City woman coming to Jamaica.
Wow.
And she's like an ad exec, and it's kind of satirical about tourism and advertising, and it's a beautiful travelogue, and it has some great music in it, and it's such a great companion piece to it. And he died before the restoration was it was lost. There was a tragic story, like the negatives were lost.
Oh wow.
Then they got turned up, and they managed to make a new print. I think it screened at Toronto in 2005-06, which is when he saw it, and he passed away shortly after that.
Wow.
But whenever I'm thinking about Harder They Come and the intelligence that's firing it, I often think of that film as a counterweight or a companion piece to it, because that's much more an explicitly the critique, the social critique is much more explicit in that than I think in The Harder They Come. And I think it's a film that deserves to be a bit better known. So I just wanted to like shout it out.
I'm glad you did. Okay. All right, let's take a quick break.
No, hold on a minute.
Listen,
this is. I'm sorry.
Yes.
I don't mean to read you your own book, but he finished his Harder They Come page with the absolute perfect. It's almost as if he was a writer working on a book. Couldn't be more educated. I don't mean to read. I'm not reading it to you because I know you've read it. I'm reading it to our audience. But we have to finish this segment with his final paragraph, which is a perfect way to wrap this up. The Harder They Come remains the most well-known reggae film to emerge from Jamaica, but it's not alone. Other cult classics include a Greek guy's name I'm not going to try to pronounce, but he made Rockers, and it's incredible. 1978. Yes. I love that movie. An earthy Robin Hood meets Vittorio De Sica's bicycle thief-style fable. Bro, nobody's ever described that movie better. Oh my God. The enigmatic and spiritual adventure Countryman, 1982, starring the eponymous Rastafarian fisherman, and the raucous dance hall queen, 1997, directed by Don Letts and Rich Elgood, which put women at the center of the story. I'm sorry, you can't finish the Harder They Come segment better than that.
Thank you.
I'm done.
There we go. All right.
Thank you.
Having done that, let's take a quick break, and then we will talk about the movie's release and reception. Friends, let's talk about the release and reception of The Harder They Come, which opened in New York City on February 8th, 1973. Also opening in Gotham that week. Carry On, Doctor. I wanted to lead with that, Ashley. I'm sure as a British person,
very culturally sensitive of you. I appreciate that.
Thank you. Michael Caine in Pulp, John Wayne in The Train Robbers, Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing in The Creeping Flesh. This is odd because we did just mention it. Fred the Hammer Williamson and Larry Cohen's Black Caesar. Pretty good double it up possibility there. And another fantastic music film. Mike, did you know this? Wattstax opened on the same day.
Oh my God, dude.
Yeah.
You don't need to do anything but go to the movies that weekend.
Also playing in New York that week, The Heartbreak Kid, The Getaway, Jeremiah Johnson, Steelyard Blues, The World's Greatest Athlete, Trick Baby, Fat City, Up the Sandbox, Seamus, The Poseidon Adventure, The Life and Times of Judge Roy Bean, Bijou, and, of course, the most profitable movie of the year, Deep Throat. Mike, what were the news headlines on that day?
Thursday, February 8, 1973, the Church of Denmark, officially called the Evangelical-Lutheran Church of Denmark, became the first Christian body to recognize gay marriage. When Pastor, who becomes the second person in this episode, I'm not even going to try to pronounce his last name, performed a wedding of two men. The gentleman followed on February 25th with the televised wedding of a lesbian couple. Neither marriage was given legal recognition by the Kingdom of Denmark, but nonetheless he did them, and obviously he did one of them on television. And I just want to say the first gay wedding I ever went to was in 1984 in Kansas, bro. Believe you me, that was not officially recognized. But when it happened later, as the conversation was happening later, I was already inured to it.
Yep.
Like, I already know lesbians that have gotten married and divorced. Why are you acting weird about it? That's, I think, a very important thing to happen in 1973.
Yep.
Also, U.S. Senator Sam Ervin was appointed the chairman of the Senate Watergate Committee, so I'm sure nothing came of that. Ervin is a weird dude. Do you know anything about this guy?
I don't.
He is one of the strongest sort of like civil rights guys, in not civil rights as in the Civil Rights Act, as in the Bill of Rights, right? Like, keeping the government out of your house, keeping them from tapping phones. He was super aggro about all that stuff, right? So that's how I first found out about him. Sure. It's from a positive thing, now he's the head of the Senate Watergate Committee, right? Sure. But then when you look at it, he voted against the Civil Rights Act of 1957, the Civil Rights Act of 1960, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, 68. He voted against the 24th Amendment. He voted against the Voting Rights Act. He voted against everything, any positive thing that could ever have happened the entire time that he was a senator. Anyway, he's a weird dude. That's all you need to know about him.
He was in favor of a very specific, narrow kind of civil rights, apparently.
He was a fan of the government not being able to come in white people's house, but white people can then go do whatever the fuck.
Yeah, apparently so.
Finally, have you ever seen the movie Record? R-E-C?
Oh, no, I haven't. I know what you're talking about, though.
It's a found footage horror movie.
Yeah.
Francisco Paca Plaza, who is the gentleman that directed that movie, was born on this day. And that's not actually a news item, and nobody gave a shit when it happened except his family, I'm sure.
Sure.
But I like that movie so much, I'm using this as an excuse
Fair enough.
To recommend people watch that movie.
There you go.
So that happened February 8th, 1973, sort of. Jason, what did the critics say about The Harder They Come?
In the New York Times, Abe H. Weiler wrote, quote, reported to be the first feature filmed by Jamaicans in Jamaica, The Harder They Come, which landed at the embassy yesterday, is striking proof that a good many of the natives are far removed from the carefree vacationer sun, surf, and daiquiris. If it isn't particularly polished in its acting or melodrama, this focus on an aspiring young black singer's short, unhappy life seems as honest in its depiction of the seamier practices of some of the islanders. He concluded, the largely amateur cast of black performers and their producer-director may be involved in basically simple action fare in The Harder They Come, but they also leave a slightly disturbing documentary impression of the darker side of the sunny Jamaica. In Time, Jay Cox raved, fast, tough, sinuous, with a score of Jamaican reggae that jauntily accentuates its vigor. This saga of the career of a small-time pop pusher and pop star is a kind of Caribbean threepenny opera. I like that. It does not have the depth, but it does have some of the energy and a little of the fury, the same sort of lovingly savage feeling for the brash ethos of the underworld. However, Roger Ebert gave it a mixed negative 2.5 out of 4 stars, noting, Perry Henzell's The Harder They Come is sort of 2 movies in one. First, we get a Jamaican version of the standard black exploitation movie with guns and gangsters and a flashy superhero turned folk hero. But the second movie, the one that makes the experience worthwhile, is a celebration of Jamaican music and style. So he preferred that half of the movie as well, Ashley. His complaints essentially were, quote, the characters aren't consistent and Cliff eventually becomes so unbelievable that we just stop caring. The movie's ending is an exercise in plot. Its beginning and its music deserve better than that. And Pauline
The
Kael.
end does feel much more like a studio note than the beginning. I mean, that is just like, it feels much more like they knew that's how they had to end their thing, I like it anyway, but.
Yeah. And Pauline Kael opined, quote, the film itself is a mess, but the music is redeeming, and Jimmy Cliff's joy in music, along with the whole cultures, stays with you. The title song goes on playing in your head. But, she wrote, the movie turns into a feverish social protest fantasy, and infectious charm and social convulsions mix badly. The continuity is hurried and haphazard. By the time Ivan is writing slogans on walls, going from I was here to I am everywhere, he has turned into a symbol of revolt, and because of him, the businessmen try to starve the population into submission. The episodes aren't dramatically intact, and they're not rounded enough to explain the hero's change from country boy to defiant publicity-loving outlaw. The movie itself becomes an example of pop sensationalism when Ivan is on the most wanted posters and at the top of the hit record charts. There are so many ironies and cross currents in the culture that we can't handle this ironic martyrdom too. End quote. Agree to disagree, Pauline. All right, how did it do in terms of box office and awards, Mike?
As an independent genre film released in 1972 and 1973, there are unsurprisingly no box office receipts or major awards to report. However, the soundtrack album was an international sensation. You're damn right it was. Selected for preservation in the National Recording Registry in 2021, deeming it culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant. It also appeared in the top 200 of all three of Rolling Stone's lists of the 500 greatest albums of all time. Yeah, buddy.
Yeah, it did. All right, now it's time for a segment we call Double It Up, where we each select one movie that we think would make an ideal double feature with today's focal film. Ashley Clark, you're our guest, which means you go first.
I am, but I'm also going to just quickly say there's a review of that film that I love. It's one of the posters, which says, infinitely more intelligent than Last Tango in Paris.
I love that poster.
I don't know who said it, but whoever did, well done to them.
Yeah.
I am going to keep us in a kind of reggae sphere.
Great.
And I'm going to recommend a film called Babylon from 1980.
Yeah.
Which is a British film, which stars Brinsley Ford from the group Aswad. And it's about the life and times of a young guy trying to make it as a reggae musician in London, but he's facing all sorts of social pressures, the police, from his family, and it's a really kind of evocative time capsule of Thatcher era London. It's beautifully shot. It's actually shot by a guy called Chris Menzies, who shot Kes, brilliant British cinematographer. So it's a really beautiful, polished film. It was re-released a few years ago. I had the great pleasure to program it at BAM when I was there.
Nice.
And it was an extremely successful repertory run. Has an amazing soundtrack. The arc, the character has a similar-ish arc without giving too much away. It's not quite as in the exploitation movie category as Harder They Come, but it's just a brilliant film, and it's a different spin on the reggae movie. And I think everyone, if you find things to like in Harder They Come, you will definitely find things to like in Babylon, and it's pretty widely available now, thankfully, because it wasn't for a long time.
Right. All right. Credit where due. Sorry, just to circle back to this. I pulled up that poster, and the source of the infinitely more intelligent than Last Tango in Paris quote is Kevin Sanders of the ABC television network. So shout out
Kevin.
Shout out Kevin.
If you're listening.
If you're still with us. Thank you for the poll quote. For my pick, I was sorely tempted, and I'm just going to mention it. I was really tempted to pick the movie that introduced me to Jimmy Cliff at about age 10 or 11, which was Club Paradise, Harold Ramis's Club Paradise, starring Robin Williams, which was why I watched it. It was heavy rotation on HBO, circa 87, 88, when I was really getting into Robin Williams. It's not a very good movie, but he, again, tremendously charming. He's basically the second lead in the thing behind Robin Williams. Some terrific songs in it. You could do worse than Club Paradise, but the movie I'm actually going to recommend, because it's literally in this movie, is Django, the original Franco Nero Django, which is a movie I love to begin with. I think there is a fascinating conversation happening between them, just in terms of basically regional filmmaking, low budget genre, but infusing it with so much local flavor and color that it becomes something new and specific, and then somehow also weirdly universal. And also I wanted to mention it because I forget, one of the Boston theaters is doing a repertory series that I read about, where they show a movie. They pick movies where people go to the movies, and then when they go to the movie, in that movie they stop that movie and they show the movie that they go to see, and then they go back to that movie. So you could do that with this. I'm saying you could start this movie and then stop it to watch Django in the middle, and then go back and watch the rest of The Harder They Come afterwards. Mike, what about you?
That's the deepest film nerd shit I've ever heard of.
It's a little much. It's a little much.
That's incredible. I knew what movie I was going to pick as soon as I heard we were doing this one, and it's been mentioned already. But like, if you haven't seen Rockers, go watch Rockers. It's Rockers in a lot of ways feels like people who had seen this movie and had a little bit more money and a little bit more patience. There's a lot more sort of just hanging out, I feel like, in Rockers than there is in this. All of the like record plant stuff, I just can't.
It's a perfect movie. There aren't many.
Dude, yeah,
there's about 7. There's about 7, and Rockers is one of them.
It's sort of like after you watch this first, and then But it really is. I mean, it's just, I love it. I just love it. And to me, they exist in the same place. Because I had seen this, I had never seen Rockers.
Theodoros Bafaloukos, by the way.
Thank you. Theodoros Bafaloukos.
There's a sequence in that set to Stepping Razor by Peter Tosh, which is one of the best things ever put to film. And I love it, and it's a great. I think you're so right to pair it with Harder They Come. It's just the perfect double bill. You couldn't have a better night at the cinema than those two.
So there you go.
Well, and I feel like when I was in that little Blackwell universe, like it was as ubiquitous as The Harder They Come. But as soon as I got out of it,
whoa.
So I keep interrupting you. I keep flexing, but
please.
Audio only listeners, Ashley has just produced like a giant like coffee table Rockers book off the shelf behind him. Just reach back and pulled it out all cash.
I feel like it's much less known than The Harder They Come,
right.
Even among sort of our audience, fans, our friends, and stuff like that. I just feel like Rockers is one that a lot of people have seen the trailer, but few people have seen the movie, and that's a shame because it's fucking perfect. Now I got a book I need to go find on eBay
Speaking of books, there's this one as well.
There we go. That's the next thing we're about to get to.
The book again is, you can keep holding it up, buddy. The book again is The World of Black Film, A Journey Through Cinematic Blackness in 100 Films. It's on shelves now, and it is indispensable. Ashley, where can people follow you online and on social media? Where can they read your work, etc.?
Instagram, _Ash_Clark. That's kind of my only real social presence at the minute. But I have a Substack called Keeping Up. That I update very intermittently. I used to be very regular with it, and then the book got in the way. But that was my space to write about whatever I was thinking about, really. Music, football, English football, soccer. I should clarify. And just, whatever. So Instagram, Keeping Up, the Substack. And obviously, I work at Criterion and, work closely with our head of programming for the channel. So a lot of the films in the book I've made, attempts to make available and accessible where possible. So a lot of the films that are in this book are available on the Criterion channel, and I would urge you to check them out.
So are you sad Salah's leaving, or happy he's not going to be whooping your ass anymore?
Well, and I'm a big fan. Big fan of Mo Salah. I think like watching this guy play football has been one of the joys of my life as someone who watches the Premier League.
But if Liverpool's a rival of whoever's scarf you have, I'm sure it's not too sad to see him leave.
Doesn't bother me. I support a team called AFC Wimbledon, and we are in the League One, which is like the 3rd division.
You're good.
I'm fine. I'm an ethical-based supporter, and I'll link this back to film in a way. Like, for some reason, our most famous fan is a guy called John Green, who's well known as a young adult author, and he wrote a book called The Fault in Our Stars, which starred Shailene Woodley and Ansel Elgort.
My wife loves it.
When you talk about professional broadcasting, that I managed to take something completely alienating to your listenership and bring it back round to a not fondly remembered movie. But John Green, good man, supports AFC Wimbledon, and here's to reggae music and here's to English football.
All right, and you can hear more of that on Ashley and Mike's football podcast.
Yeah, I wonder if that will make the cut. Jason's trying to get us out of here in as smooth and professional way as possible.
It will 100% make the cut because Mike is the one who edits the episode. I
Jason
love that
look
Bailey.
on his face whenever
Panic.
any
Sheer
version
panic.
of football comes up.
Sheer panic. How do we get out of this one?
I'm Jason Bailey. I'm Blue Sky and Letterboxd. Mike, where can people find you?
I am Michael Hull on Letterboxd and having tons of fun.
And of course, if you like the show,
I added aspiring Fulci completist to my bio lately, so
goodness.
I'm really having fun on
Good luck with that.
these days.
Good luck with that. If you like the show and you think other people might like it too, please do leave us a rating or review on your podcatcher of choice, or you know what, just tell people to listen. If you'd like to join our mailing list to get weekly show notes, links to the things we mentioned, including Ashley's Substack and such, you can do that at buttondown.email/filmfanatic. A quick reminder that my book, Gandolfini, Jim, Tony, and the Life of a Legend, is out now in paperback as well as hardback, ebook, and audiobook. And if you like watching people record a podcast, if you like seeing the books that Ashley can produce on a second's notice with flourish and theatricality, then you can find us on YouTube on our channel Guide for the Film Fanatic.
Our humblest thanks to our guiding light, Mr. Danny Perry, author of Guide for the Film Fanatic. And shout out to executive producer Blake Howard, who once gave me these words to live by. Mm-hmm. This is show business, baby. No business, no show.
Thank you again, Ashley.
Thank you so much. Been a pleasure.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you, Jason.
And thank you for listening. On the next Guide for the Film Fanatic, we welcome author and podcaster Will Sloan for our first discussion of a XXX rated entry in the guide, the 1982 cult favorite Cafe Flesh. See you then.